So in this session, we'll discuss about data-driven testing. What is data-driven testing? So till now, what we used to do, for example, so if we take any website, right, any web page, so if we take any web page, for example, say for example, take this form, right? So in order to automate this web page, right, what we used to do, like we used to provide, if you want to fill this form, if you wanted to automate this form, right? So we used to provide some input to this form. So these are the input boxes, right? So according to this input boxes, so we provide some input to it. So if the web element is a input box, we use send keys and we provide some input to this, right? If it is a radio button, we click on it. If it is a checkbox, we click on it. And if it is a drop down, we select. We use a class called select and we select the options within the drop down, right? So, and we have also seen date picker, how to actually, pick up a date. All this we have seen, drag and drop, slider, how to select an element within a frame. We have to switch to the frame. All this we have seen, right? And we have even seen how to automate a web table. All this we have seen. Now, say for example, in all these examples, when we are automating, so we were like, in order to test this form, say for example, in order to test only this form, right? So this name field. So how do we test? Like we can provide some name. So we used to provide some name like this, right? And we used to go ahead by automating this input field. But say for example, I wanted to test this. So why we are automating, first of all, we wanted to test some features, right? And when we wanted to test it repeatedly, when we wanted to validate that field repeatedly, so we are using automation. We are writing an automation script for that. So anyway, the task will be repeatedly done. So as it is repeatedly done, we wanted to reduce the manual effort there. So this is the reason we are actually writing a script for automating that web element. Just we'll take just one element, this input field. So how do we test it? So say for example, we provide some text into it. So it has to accept it. Say for example, I provide some numbers to it. So it should not accept because we are saying it's a name. Name cannot contain numbers. Say for example, I will just provide something like this. Can I provide it like that? No. So it should not accept that. So all these kind of data, right? So we call it as test data. So given an input field, for example, right? So we will have a lot of test data. Say for example, I'll provide only blank spaces, one blank space, or I'll not even provide a blank space. I'll just leave it empty and we'll try to submit this form, right? So what happens in that case? It has to throw right error, right? Saying the name can't be empty. So if I provide some numbers, so and try to submit the form. So we should get a valid error saying that name cannot contain numbers. For example, if it has special characters, so say for example, something like that, like this, right? So in this case, it should not say, it should say like name contains special characters. So special characters are not allowed in the name field. So this kind of error we should be getting. And but it should accept something like, say for example, if I provide something like this. So this is a blank character. Again, this has to be supported, right? All these kind of, uh, tests, all these kind of different kinds of input has to be validated for this input field. Only then we can say that, and if it is working according to our expectation, only then we can say that this input field is validated and it is working according to our expectation. Now, in order to test this input field, only this input field, so how do we usually do? We used to do something like this, right? Send keys, driver dot, right? Say for example, this was a name, web element. name web element, name dot send keys, and then we can send something like this. And if you wanted to test another one with another test data, say for example, empty string, we can provide like this. Say blank character, one blank space like this. And then say for example, which contains some numbers in it like this. So all these kind of variety of input which we are providing to the input field is called as test data. And till now what we used to do, we used to hard code this test data within our code in the sense whenever we are writing automation script. So within the automation script itself, if you are providing the test data like this, then that becomes huge. This is only for one field, and I have not completed complete test data as well. So we are just discussing about four values, right? So it could extend to n number of values, right? So I can provide something like this, you know, underscore. I may provide some space. It could have middle name as well, right? So in that case, we will have two blank spaces. All these we wanted to validate. All these kind of varieties of data we wanted to validate for one input field, right? So and we are talking only about input field, right? And for each other fields like radio button, checkboxes, so different test data has to be validated. And if we are writing this as part of our automation script. So the maintenance of it will be difficult. So tomorrow, if I wanted to validate some other combination, like some other input, say for example, some other two types of input, right? Or say for example, some underscore might be supported tomorrow in the name, right? In that case, I have to verify my input data and I have to remove this. Or at least I have to, you know, uh, remove this or put this under valid values, right? So all this becomes tedious job when we have test data included along with the automation script code. So whatever data we are testing with, right, our code. So we write the code once, code in the sense automation script here. So we write the automation script once, and that has to be executed with multiple test data. So all this is test data for one input field called name, right? So we wanted to validate our input field called name with all these kinds of test data. This could extend to n number of values still. So all the combinations we wanted to validate that field, and we wanted to validate it if it is accepting as per our expectation or not, right? So in this case, maybe like this might be the valid value. This might not be the valid value, right? So name can't be blank. All these are invalid values, and this might be the valid value, and the last one is valid value. All this kind of test data we have to put externally in some file, and we'll read the test data into our automation script, and we'll validate each of this test data. And we can, with this, what we can do, we can even have the expected value in that file as well, external file, and we can see if the actual values when you are validating are actually matching the expected result or not. So that we can do it, and we can even put that result also back into the same file, same external file. So that once the test is done, so we just need to look at the file. You don't need to be, sitting right there in front of your machine looking for the automation script when it is running, right? So you just need to look at the one file to say that your how the automation script went through, if it is working as expected or not. Looking at that file, you should be able to say that, right? So these are the different advantages of having the test data. So this is test data, and having this test data in an external file separated from script. Maintaining test data ext in an external file separated from script, separated from the automation script, is called as data driven, right? So because our automation script is driven by data, which is present in an external file. We will not have any such kind of test data, right? Or not only test data, right? There could be some configuration properties as well, which we'll be using very frequently. Say, for example, the app URL, right? App URL, which we use it for a driver.get, right? So that can be, put in a different file. These are different. This is not this might not come under test data, but this will be using in our automation script very frequently. So the frequently used ones also we can put it in some file, so which we'll call it as config.properties file. App.url, and you might want it to use if that is some application, right? So we might want it to use some particular username or email, password, like that. So this we can put it in an external file, and then we'll load this file, this properties file, and then once we load it, we'll read these values into some Java variables, and those variables we can use it anywhere in the script. So this is about the configuration properties, and test data is it will also be present in some external file. So this external file we can name it some, we can give it some name, and we can again we read this test data. Usually test data will be present in some Excel file. Excel file, then we read this Excel file. And if you remember, we have seen how to read data and how to write data into a Excel sheet in the last session, right? So that we can use it here. So that way we can actually separate our test data from the automation scripts. We can have a MS Excel file where we'll actually maintain the test data, and we'll read this test data into our automation script wherever it is required. And config.properties is all about using the frequently used data, right? So this will not have more values, but this will be repeatedly used. For example, I wanted to test with one sample data, one test data, and I wanted to close my browser, and again I wanted to relaunch. Like that, in some cases we might wanted to use this URL multiple times, right? So instead of hard coding it, or hard coding it or specifying it every time in the code, so we can separate it from the automation script. So what are all the common things which we use in our automation script, that we can actually separate it. So which are all required to be provided within the automation script. That kind of config level properties can also be separated from the automation script and can be maintained in a separate file called config.properties, where we can provide these values. So without this, we might not be able to test the application. So what we can do is such data can be maintained with in a separate configuration file. So tomorrow, if you wanted to change, right? So you don't need to change it in the complete automation script. So in the automation script, this might be used multiple times, anywhere, right? So you don't need to search for it. You'll just change it at one place in the config properties, which actually reflect in the complete automation script. So that's the use of maintaining the frequently used properties of the application separately in a file called config.properties. Same advantage will be there with the test data as well. So test data, if we maintain in some MS Excel file spreadsheet, right? So what is the advantage? You can easily maintain. You can expand that file, right, to a number of records, a number of valid inputs or invalid inputs as well. If you wanted to validate the invalid input data, right? So that's the advantage. We can modify the data. All this we can do it even without touching the automation script. In fact, you don't even need to open the automation script. You can just work on, you can just open the file, and you can just work on the file itself, like providing more data, or modifying the data, deleting the data. Everything you can do it within an Excel file. So that's a great advantage of having test data maintained in an external file like Excel sheet. So if we hard code some test data, if we hard code test data into the automation script, right? So the disadvantage is you need to go to the automation script, and we need to find out where we are using the test data. That has to be modified manually every time, right? And you don't know what are all the places we have that test data hard coded in the script. It could even be present in multiple class files, right? So instead of that, we can have maintain this test data in a separate file. Then we can have the change managed in one file, which will reflect in the entire script. So that's the advantage of having the test data in a separate external file, right? And having this test data or this configuration properties data which we are using for the automation script, having this separate from the automation script is what we call it as like data-driven testing. Because we are maintaining the test data or data which is required for automation script, we are maintaining it separately from the automation script. And so how your automation script is driven now? It is driven by the data external, which is coming from external file, right? So this is the reason it is called as data-driven testing. So data-driven testing, what are the steps we follow? The first thing is we have to know the functionality. We have to know the test steps. Test case. So each test case will have some steps, right? Say for example, I have a login page. What will be my, so say for example, let me go here into some website. See, I can provide some username. I can provide the password, right? This will be my one combination of test data. When I click on login, it logs in, right? So for this, what will be the test case steps? So we have to navigate to the URL, right? Navigate to open the browser first. Open browser will be our first step in the test case, right? Then navigate to specific URL or app URL. That will be my second step, right? And then validate the fields. Validate the fields. Validate the field, username, validate the field, password, maybe, right? So these will be my test case step. So once we have the functionality, like clarity on this, what has to be done in order, then so we have to validate the username and password, right? So for this, we can actually write the test data. We can prepare the test data. So we can prepare the test data, maybe in some Excel file. And then after this, we can develop the automation script. Because it's all about writing the automation script, right? So this will be common. This is what we have done till now. We automate the things, right? So we'll do this. In addition to that, so first we'll have the test case steps. So once we have clarity on the test case steps is simple. So performing the test case manually once. So just to verify the functionality is working correctly or not. So once it is working fine, then we can start automating, right? So while automating, we have to make sure that the test data is separate from the automation script. We'll maintain the test data in a separate external file like Excel file, and then we'll start developing the automation script. So these are the steps we'll follow when we are actually having the data-driven testing, right? So along with this, when I say prepare the test data, it also includes a config file, config.properties file as well. So both all this we can call it as test data. So all these three steps we have to follow like in order. So first we'll identify the functionality test case, what test case we wanted to automate, and if it is working manually as expected or not. Then we'll go with the test data. We'll maintain the test data in a separate external file, and then we'll develop the automation script by reading this test data into the script, right? So this is what we call it as data-driven testing. Now we'll see an example on that. We'll take this example. So we'll navigate to this URL and we wanted to test this different combinations. For example, standard user and this same, I think password is same for all users. So if you click on login, if you see the URL has changed, right? So we will validate that. So because you see this title Swag Labs, so this is same even if you don't log in, right? Even if you log out, the title is same. So we can't actually validate it with the driver.get title. The page title is same even though if you log in or log out, right? So even if I log out from this, so the page title is same. So we can validate it using current URL. So current URL here is this one, right? So once you log in, you will see some different URL, right? So with this, we will validate it. So once we click on login, so we will get the current URL and validate it with this URL. If it matches with that, then we'll say that the test case is passed, right? Some logout user wanted to test it. See, it says, sorry, this user has been logged out, right? We'll validate this. So how do we validate? Once we click on this, we should not see the URL change, right? So it has to stay on the same web page. Or you can, we can identify this element, web element, and even validate this label, right? So like this, we wanted to test it. See, if I provide some other input, so problem user, it actually logged in, right? And if you see performance glitch user, if I click on login, so it is taking some time to log in. So this was intentional. This was intentional. So just for that user, so if I click on login, it should take some time. That's the validation. Error user. So all these kind of users, they might have provided different users, but the expected value is same for this. But in reality, right? So what happens? We have to provide this all this input. So this they have provided. Usually you'll have a login form like this, right? Username, password, login. So in that case, we'll provide all the combinations of usernames and password to validate this login form, right? So now we will see how do we actually automate this login form with a different test data. Different test data in the sense like providing different combinations of username and password. So what I'll be doing here is, so anyway, they have provided some values, right? So we'll use this as the test data in this example, and we'll, for each username and password combination, we'll try to log in and we'll see what's the result, and we'll compare that with the expected result. We'll have some expected result and then we'll compare it with that expected result. And then if it is matching, then we'll actually write into the same Excel file the result here. See, what we'll do is we'll have the username, we'll have the password. So what we'll do is we'll read this data, this combination, right? And then we'll click on the login button and we'll see, we'll get the current URL. If it is matches with the current URL, then we'll say it is passed, right? If it is passed, then we can say that we can actually hardcode, we can open the file and we'll write the result as pass, right? So that kind of validation we are going to put in our automation script. So once we are done with the test, so we have to see this column C and column D should have the same values. So if these two matches, then we can see that our validation is successful or our test case is successful with our test data, whatever test data we have provided, right? So that's what we are going to do now. So another advantage of having the test data in external file is, say for example, I have to repeat this, right? So I have to repeat this by, hard coding it in the automation script. Every time we need to provide username and password in the automation script, and we have to repeat the same test again and again, right? So we can loop it, but still we need to hard code these values into the automation script, and then we have to loop it, right? So the same thing we'll do it now, but we loop it but we'll read the data from an external file, from this file. So as far as we have seen now, so only this logged out user has failed, right? Has failed for login. So we'll validate that. So we can start automating it. So that's the test case. So the test case will be login test. So we provide the username and we provide the password. Click on the login button. And once we click on the login button, we'll verify the URL. If it matches with the expected URL, then we say it has passed. And that we'll verify it with the expected output here. So if it matches with this pass, then we'll open the Excel sheet and we'll write it as passed or success in the result. So, and we'll also fill the color as green, right? So that what happens? So in the second case, it has to fail. So if it has to fail in the sense, like again, we'll have some validation, and based on that validation, we'll write the result here back into the Excel sheet, saying that this with this test data, it failed, is what we'll write. So it has to fail is the expected output, right? So if it is successful, then we'll write it as pass. So even though pass is green, so in this case, we should say that the test data failed with this data because the expected output is has to fail. But if it is passes, then we have to say that this, so with this test data, the test case has been failed, right? So that's what it is. In the same way, we'll fill the result for all these type of all these rows. Each row is representing one kind of test data for username and password. So once we are done with the complete test, right? Complete test case with all the combinations. So once you open the file, you can see the result here. If it matches with the expected, then you can see that the test case is passed. All right, now we can start actually automating the test case. Is that clear? Are you getting? All right. So now let's start automating it. So this functionality, we know what has to be validated. Yeah, we'll open the browser, we'll navigate to the specific URL. We are going to validate the username and password. All right, we know what has to the functionality, right? Now preparing the test data is also done. We have the test data here ready, right? And now we have to develop the automation script. So let's start developing the automation script for this. So for today, I'll create a new package. I'll call it as day 37. We'll create a new class. We'll call it as data-driven test. And so we will need WebDriver for instantiating the browser, right? So I'll have a static WebDriver instance here, and we can get this. We can import it, right? Now observe. So whatever has to be done repeatedly, we'll have one method called setup method, right? So we'll have some method called setup. Whatever has to be done at the beginning. So at the beginning, what we usually do, we used to have the instantiate Chrome driver like this, right? If you wanted to automate the test case using Chrome browser, we used to do like this. WebDriver driver equal to new Chrome driver. Just so put it in a method called setup. So we can have this method also as public. And then what we usually do, all the common things which we do at the beginning, right? Beginning of the automation script, I'm having it have put in a method called setup method because I know. So I definitely need to call this setup method for any test case I wanted to execute because it's common that you need to launch the browser, you need to maximize the browser. So these are common things, right? So we are putting it in a method so that we don't need to repeat these steps for each test case. So we can just call this setup method so that the Chrome browser will be launched and it will be maximized. And also I wanted to include just to have the page load, just to manage the page loads and page web elements to be visible on the web page. So we'll use the wait times. I'll use the implicit wait here. I'll say duration dot of seconds. We'll have a default of 10 seconds. So 10 seconds should be more than enough. So if the page is not loading within 10 seconds or if the web element is not visible or present to interact within the 10 seconds, then we have to actually debug we have to try it manually. There could be some issue with the application itself, right? So that's the reason we have a default timeout of 10 seconds. All right. So all this we had it in a method called setup. So now whenever we wanted to, start testing some test case, we just need to call this method. That's all. So Chrome browser will be launched, it will be maximized, and then automatically an implicit wait of 10 seconds will be applied across the test case, right? So in the same way, what we can do is like we can even write something called teardown, which actually returns nothing. So what we'll do here is, so we'll call it at the end of the script and we'll see if driver is still present, right? If it is not null, then we'll quit. We usually do this at the end of the script, right? End of the each test case. Now what we are doing is, so we are putting it in a separate method so that we can call this method at the end of the script. So you don't need to write it driver.quit after each test case, right? So you can just write the teardown method so that this method can be used at the end of the test case. So teardown method is simple. So it is so all the so once the test case is done, so whatever we wanted to perform. So what we usually do. So once the test case is validated, we'll close the browser. That's all, right? So we'll close the browser or we'll close all the resources and then we'll close the browser. Usually we'll close all the resources in a try catch block followed by a finally block. If you remember, we used to have finally, we learned about finally block, right? So it actually follows after try catch block where irrespective of you get an exception. So irrespective of if catch block is executed or not, finally will definitely be executed. There we can actually close all the resources like when we open a file. So in this case, we are actually working on with the files, right? So you can close the file, right? You can close the workbook file, all these resources we have to close. So that part we can put it in the finally block. Tear down is different. How it is different is, so we wanted to actually, yeah, we can use it. We can use it instead of tear down. These are all like our methods. We can name it. So usually it's like a, it's not even a convention. It's like a, some kind of pattern, right? So you can call it as a pattern. So people usually call it as setup as a start method. You can even call this as start script and end script like that. Yeah. So to answer your question, you can have any other names as well. But these are the common names we use. So for setup, for starting the script, we use a name called setup. And during the end of the script, use a method called teardown, where we usually have the script written to close the browser. So once we are done with this, then we can actually start writing the script for it, our script, right? So what the script we wanted to write, so that we'll see it now. So we wanted to automate a username and password. So we wanted to provide username, we wanted to provide a password, and then we wanted to click on the login button, right? So we wanted to click on the login button. So that will automate it now. Again, so this will be this method. So whatever we are doing it now, so this will be repeated. So we know this has to be repeated with different data, right? So test login, we can say, right? And it will be public and I'll have string method written. So what happens is once I validate this method, So we will actually return the result if it is passed or failed, if it is successful or not, right? This method will take two parameters, username and password. All right. Now what we can do? Yeah, add return statement. Yes, we'll return something. Driver.get. We'll navigate to this URL. And then what we usually do, we have to provide the input to this username and password, right? So we can inspect these elements. All this remains the same. So we just need to find the element. So I can use something called ID here, right? And also, yeah, ID can be used here, username. So driver.find element by.id. So this is username field, right? So we can just say username field. So in the same way, I wanted to get the web element for the password as well. So we wanted to provide password, right? So password also has ID. So we can use ID here by dot ID. You can use any other locator as well. This is also a returning web element. So this is a password field. All right. And we also need a login button, right? So find element dot login button. We'll take the ID for this as well. Y dot ID. All right. So now we have located the three fields which we wanted, right? Now we have to provide the input to this. So how do we actually provide the input to this? So we call this method test login multiple times, right? So, and whenever whoever is calling this method will pass a username and password to this method. So that username and password, we are going to provide it to a username field and password field, right? So that we'll call it in the main method. So in the main method, we'll create an object of data-driven test. Data-driven test, we'll create an object for this, and then we will actually call this test login method by providing username and password. So how do we provide username and password in the main method? First, we are gonna read the data from the Excel sheet, and then for each input, so we'll read for each input username and password, we'll call this test login method. So that we'll do it later. But first, we wanted to write it for assuming that we are actually writing the test for one input, one test data, right? So just assume that you have the username and password in these parameters, right? So whoever calls this method will pass the username and password. So using this username and password, so we are actually, we wanted to validate and write the automation script. So now, so say just assume username and password are the actual username and password values, right? So you have to pass this to the username field. So you have to observe here, username field is a web element. We identified it from the web page. So you should not get confused with this. This is a string, actual test data. So the parameter which has been passed to this method is the actual data which we need to pass, right? So these are the fields. Now, so before providing any data to any input field, right? So it's always a good practice to use a clear method. So clear method actually clears it in the sense. So it actually makes the input field empty. See, if this element is a form entry element, this will reset its value. It will reset its value. Resetting is like erasing the existing data in that input field. And so so that it will be ready to accept the new input, right? Now, so it's always a good practice to use the clear method before you provide a new input or before you actually provide a input, right? And then we can use send keys of username. So nothing new here. So we can use send keys as well directly, but so we need to clear this. So because we wanted to test, you call this test login method multiple times, right? So whenever we call it for the second time, this username will be there, the old name, right? So might be there. So just to make sure, we wanted to clear that. So once we use clear method, so it will reset its value. So the username field will be reset here. And then we'll pass the actual username which we wanted to test this method with. And then once it is done, we wanted to pass field also, pass field dot clear, and then pass field dot send keys. All right. In the same way, like how we did for the username field, we also pass the data to the password field. All right. Once we are done with this, we wanted to click on the login button. Let's do that. Done, right? So according to this, what is done? So functionality, we know what has to be done. The test case steps were clear. So that's a manual task, right? So we can get it from the manual test case steps. And then we prepare the test data that is also there here, right? Now we wanted to develop the automation script. So we have developed it. Almost we have developed like what has to be tested, right? So only thing is this test login has to be repeated multiple times with different combinations of username and password, right? So only that thing is remaining now. And also, how do we validate? So that's fine when we can actually read this data in the main method, and we can right loop it, and then we'll pass each time for each row. We'll actually call this test login method, right? So once we log in, so we have to validate it, right? So we have to check for login success or failure, right? This has to be verified. So for this, we have to write the validation. So what's our validation? If you log in like this, so the URL has changed if you observe. So this will be our validation. So what we can do is we can just say expected URL has to be this. So once we click on the login, right? So we'll say get current URL dot equals expected URL. So if it matches with this, then we'll say return success. If it doesn't matches with that, then we'll say return failure. Right? So that is what this method has to be done, right? So that's the reason we are writing the automation script for this method. So this method has to accept username and password. So and then it has to automate it. Automate in the sense provide the username and password which we have provided it to as parameters. That has to be provided to the username and password field, and login button has to be clicked. And then we are validating the URL. So if it is actually matching the expected URL, then we'll say return success, or else we'll say return failure. You can use any type of string here. This we are using it for validation, right? So you can say pass, you can say failed like that as well. So I'm just using some success and failure messages here. All right. So once we are done with this, so now we'll come to the main method where we'll actually create the object for the class. And then now observe. So I've just created an object for this data-driven test class. Now what has to be done? So if you remember, we had two methods, setup and tear down, right? So you can call these methods test dot setup. And you can even say test dot tear down. So in between this, we have to actually write our validation, right? Now, what's our validation? What we wanted to do actually? So we wanted to call this test login method and provided different test data, user different input we have to provide to this method. So we have to call this method repeatedly. So in order, we can call this repeatedly by using a loop. That's fine. But we need to get this test data, right? So right from the Excel file. So that we have to do it now. So in order to get the file, so we need to have the file present. We need to know the location of the file where it is present, right? So what we can do is, let's get this file. Let me close this. We'll have it as success, failure. I'll get this file into our project. We have test data, right? So I'll just copy it here. It's a credentials.xlsx, right? All right. So now what we'll do is system.getProperty. This we have seen in the last session, right? So if you specify user.directory, it will point to the current project. And then we can specify in the current project where it is present, the file test data. Just to escape this backslash, we are having double backslash here, right? Credentials.xlsx. This is the file. And this is actually string, right? So we have to put this in a string. This is the Excel file path. All right. So this is the file path we have, right? All right. Now, within this Excel file, so if you open this, it's present in the sheet one, right? You can say sheet one, right? So we can even hard code it here. Sheet name, my sheet name, where I have data is sheet one. Right? Now we wanted to read the data. So there are multiple ways to read the data. So we wanted to read the data. We can write the code here, like how we know how to read the data from Excel sheet we have seen in the last session, right? So instead of repeating the whole code here, right? How to read the Excel file. So it will be again like complete code, repeating the complete code, right? So anyway, what we need, we wanted to open the workbook. So we call the Excel sheet as workbook, right? So workbook, and then we need to open the sheet, particular sheet with this name, and then we need to get the row count, right? And then we'll repeat for each row. So what are all the cell values? We actually read the each cell value. So that's how we read the Excel sheet, right? So, so in order to actually avoid all those redundant code written here, right? So instead of doing that, we already did that once, right? So we can actually have something called utils, Excel utils. So what we can do here is we can use the Excel utils. For example, so this is the Excel util file I have, which might be already present, where we can call these files instead of repeating all the code here to read the data and write the data. We can have that code which is common, like reading the data from Excel and writing the data into the Excel after each test case. So what did we decide? Like we wanted to write the result back to the test case. So in that into the Excel sheet, right? So in that case, what should happen? You have to open the file in the output stream mode, and then we have to write the result and then close the file. Even for reading also, you have to open the file, read a row, and then we have to close the file. So all this data, which is like common data of reading and writing, the operations performed on the Excel sheet, we can have it in a separate file. So observe, this is not a different file, different external file, right? It's a Java file itself, but we are having this code as a util file. Util file is a util in the sense like it is an helpful file where you can call these methods within this file whenever you require it, right? So observe now. So this Excel utils file, so Java file, what it has? So it has Excel data. So you can see get Excel data is the method. When you pass a file path to it and a sheet name, right? So and observe this Excel utils is not coming from Java, right? We have prepared it. We have prepared it and we need to prepare it for our purpose. so that we can have this methods used in. So what are methods we have present in this class, right? In this Java class, then so we can use these methods so that we don't need to repeat this in our automation script, right? So we'll write it once. So this Excel utils file, we'll have it one file in our automation script, and we'll call this the methods of this Excel utils file multiple times wherever it is required. For example, in this case, I wanted to actually get the Excel data. So where we are stopped here, right? So we have the file, the spreadsheet, and we also know the sheet, what has to be read, right? So we can provide the file path and we can provide the sheet to this get Excel data method. Let's see what's the code it has. So it has, so if you see, there's something called data, which is of type array list, right? So we have seen list reference variable data and an array list, right? And now see, it has a try catch block where it has file input stream. File IS is a file input stream type, which is a static variable, right? Static object. So new file input stream of we are passing file path to it. All this is not new to us. We have seen this in the last session. I'm just repeating it again. So if you see workbook is of type again XSF workbook. New XSF workbook of file input stream we are passing. And then once we have the workbook, we can get the sheet. Where do we get the sheet name? So we are gonna pass it from the method where we are calling the get Excel data method. So from that we will get the sheet name and the file path. So sheet name. Now we have the sheet as well. So if you have the sheet, you can go through over each row and read the cell value, right? So that's what we did here. For loop. So we are starting it with 0. Index start with 0, right? And get last row num gives you the last index of the last index of the last row. So index always starts with 0. So what are all the total number of rows? So get last row num will actually return a -1. So the total number of rows -1 it will provide. So that's the reason we are saying I less than or equal to. Starts with 0, I less than or equal to. Because we wanted to read all the rows. So that's the outer for loop. So always outer for loop is for the rows. And then once we enter into the loop, so we are saying sheet.getRow. GetRow actually gives us the row. We have to specify the index. Now we get the row object. So once we get the row object, we can use the new object of. So we don't know what will be the type of the data within the Excel sheet. It could be string, integer, date, float, double, anything, right? So we are having it as object because object is a parent object for all the data types, right? So it can hold any type of data. So we are having it stored in the object data, new object of row dot get last cell num, which actually gives us the last cell index of the particular row. Now we have the row data, right? So now this row data, so we are actually initializing we are creating an object of row data to actually allocate a space. So I wanted to create an object and it has to have how many cells, how many cell objects is, so that we are specifying here. So if you say get last cell num, what it will return? It will return the count of the number of cells, right? So that number of cells of space objects I need is what we are saying here. Because for each row, so say for example, if there are like 4 cells, so that number of rows we wanted to store. That number of cells we wanted to store for that row, right? So that's what we declared here. Now, for this row data, right? So we are writing the inner loop to read the cell values. So j equal to 0, j is representing the inner loop for the reading the cell values. J less than row dot get last cell num, which actually gives you the last cell index, j plus plus, right? And then you can see row data of j. So we are actually having the object stored, row dot get cell of j. In the sense, it will actually give you the actual cell value. And remember, we are still in the ith row. That is, say for example, for the first iteration, it will be the 0th row. For the 0th row, so this line has actually declared an object array. This is an object array with n number of cell values. What is the n here? How do you get that n? Using the get last cell num method. Get last cell num method will return the last index of the cell for that row. So that number of cells we wanted to read, right? So for that, to read that, we have created an object called row data. Now we'll write a small loop, inner loop, to iterate over all the cells. So all the cells, and then we'll put the row data for that particular row. Row data of j equal to row dot get cell of j dot. We are actually converting it. We don't know the actual data type, right? So we are converting every type of data into string. So dot to string. Because if you see, get cell actually returns a cell. It is not returning string, right? So we wanted to convert it into a string. Right? So this row data actually will have particular for that particular it actually reads the each cell and puts it into row data object. So this row data will have the actual values for all the cells, right? So no, so each row data object will have the all the cell values for that particular row. So once the inner loop is done, right? So we'll add this row data object to data. Right? What is data? It is a list of objects. Row data is object array and data is list of such object, right? So when we say list, so we can add it to it, right? Data dot add object. So data is list of objects and row data is object array. So data is list of object array. Row data is object array. So this row data, once we prepare it, once we read it using this loop, so once we are done with this row data, we are adding it to the data. Data is a list. So we can use add method. Data dot add, and then we are passing row data to it. So to this data list, so the row data has been added. And this is for one iteration for the 0th index, which is the first row, right? And then I plus plus. So second row, sheet dot get row of 1, right? So the second row will be red, a row. Then get last cell number. So again, like what is the cell number for that last cell number for that row? So that will be red, and the memory will be allocated for this row data object. And again, the inner loop actually reads all the cell values for the row, and then it will be added to the list again, and so on for all the rows. So once we are done with this, all the rows, so we have this data, that is list of objects, right? That we are going to return it. This is the reason we are having the return type of as list of objects. So once we have this list of objects, so what is the list? So each list is like it contains the rows. Each row is an object array. Why it is an object array? So each row will have the n number of cells for that row, right? So object array is representing all the cells within a row, and this list is for storing all the rows, right? So this data we are returning. So once we pass one, so this method is like written once in the Excel utils file. So we can just use this method, get Excel data, and pass the file name and the sheet name. That's all. What you will get it? You will get all the records. For example, so when we pass this file path of credentials and the sheet name as one, so once we call this method, what we are gonna get? We are gonna get all these values read into the object, list object. So now we'll have this list object here when we call this method. So using the it's a Java list, right? So we can iterate over it and we can actually read username and password from it and call the test login method. So in the same way, these Excel utils will have the common methods which can be used according to our requirement. Say for example, I wanted to write Excel data. Writing, how do we actually write the Excel data? So we can pass file name, sheet name, it will take row number, and it will also take the result. So based on that, it will actually, write the cell data. We can go through it. So it's like the same code which we have seen in the last session. How do we actually write the Excel data, right? So if you see get row, we'll get the get row number. And then using the row number, we'll create the cell. We'll call the create cell method, which actually creates us the cell, right? So here we are creating the last cell number because we wanted to create the cell at the So if we have a row with say four columns, right? Four cells. So we wanted to create a new cell that will be a last cell, right? So that's what we are saying. Get last cell now, cell, or it will actually give you the last cell value because in the Excel sheet which we have it, so we wanted to write it at the last cell. See, result is always at the last cell, right? So here is the place where we wanted to write the data. So create cell of row dot get last cell num. So we have the cell. We have to set cell value of result. We'll pass the result and we wanted to write it. So we are using set cell value here. That's it. And we'll create a file output stream object and we'll write it to the workbook. And we will close the file output. So all this we have seen in the last session. So I'm not going in detail about it. So we'll call this write Excel data and we'll pass the write parameters here so that the data will be written to the respective file. Same goes with the set cell data as well. So almost write Excel data and set cell data does the same. So according to our requirement, whatever is required, so we can use it. So for example, you can see cell number is also cell num. So here it only takes row number and it is actually setting the value into the last cell, right? So this set cell data, so it is bit more than that. It actually takes cell number also, and then it will create the cell according to the cell number you pass it. Other than that, it is almost the same of it. Same as above, just that it will actually, it will have the cell number. You can specify the cell number as well for the particular row. But the last write Excel data, it assumes that it has to write the data into the last cell. That's the only difference. And also, once we are done, right? So we wanted to actually fill the color as well. So if it is passed, we wanted to mark it as green and fill that cell with green color. And if it is failed, we wanted to fill it with the red color. So we have some methods here. If you see, if you observe, so again, right? So file, sheet, row number, cell number. So this cell, we wanted to actually fill it with the green color. So when we wanted to fill it with the green color, we are going to call this method from anywhere because it is a static, right? It is a static method. So we can actually call this method using the class name, excelutils dot fill green color is what we'll call it, and we'll provide this data, which file, which sheet, row number, and cell number. And according to that, that particular cell will be marked filled with green. So these are the built-in methods which we use, right? So this style is of cell style, I guess. Yeah, you can see it's a cell style object. And then we'll use create cell style method, some method, and then we'll use this set fill foreground color. Index colors is a enum, and we'll have to specify the color which we wanted to fill with it. Yeah, and then set fill pattern. You can just wanted to have it as a foreground. So in the back end, right? So that we can see the data written on it, right? So we are seeing solid foreground. Again, fill pattern type is a right? So you don't need to remember all this. You can even use this Excel utils file as is in your code as well. And just all that you need to know is you have to know what method has to be called and what parameters has to be passed to that method. According to that, your cell gets filled with that particular color. Same goes for the red color as well. So if you wanted to not to have if you wanted to call one method, so then you can call fill color and pass the result to it. So based on the result, you can actually, so instead of having two methods, green color and red color, if you know that it has to be filled either with green or red, so you can just call this fill color and pass the result to it. So that based on the result, it will actually apply the color to it. By default, it will not apply any color or it will apply white color. So this is all about the Excel utils file. So Excel utils file is simple. So this is the file which we write it once so that we can use it for the common operations when we are working with an Excel file. So the data-driven interest is all about reading the data from the file and writing back the data, right? So in such case, this Excel utils file is handy. So you can use this file as is in our code. You don't even need to once you go through this code and you understand it, right? So that's all. You don't need to go through it every time. You can just copy this file anywhere, wherever you are writing your data-driven test, and use these methods. Call these methods. That's all. By passing the right parameters to it, and you get the return type as defined here. In your code, you get that return object, and it's all about it's all up to you, like how you actually consume the data. Right now, let's get back to our test case. So here is the place where we actually passed, right? We wanted to read the data from this file, credentials file. Now that we have the file in this path, and we also know the sheet name. Now I wanted to call a method. So what method I wanted to call? I wanted to call a method called get Excel data. So this data, the entire data I wanted to read. So what I'm going to do is Excel utils has a my Excel utils, which I have written, has a get Excel data method. So I'm going to use this method and pass the file path and sheet to it, so that it is going to return me a data object, that is list of objects. So this list will contain the rows, and each row will have the object array. Object array is representing all the cell values for each row, right? So that I'm going to get it. So let's call it Excel utils. See Excel utils dot get Excel data, and I will pass Excel file path and sheet name. That's it. What it is returning? It is returning list of objects. List of objects. I'll call it as my test data. See how simple it has become now. So so if we didn't have this Excel utils method, right? So we have to repeat all this data, right? At least this data list, all this. So you don't need to repeat that. You will just call that method. You will just use that method, right? So that you'll get a list of objects. So, and we are having that in the test data. So test data is the object which has the list of rows or list of values read from the complete Excel file. So now it's up to us, like how we are gonna use it. So what we wanted to do, why did we read this is, we wanted to start reading each value and pass it to the test login method, right? I equal to 1, I'll start with 1. So index starts with 0, but I wanted to start it with 1 because the first row has the headers, right? So I don't want it to read the headers. So I'm starting the index with 1 and test data. Test data is a list, right? So how do you get the count of the test data? How many objects I have? So I can use size method here, right? You can use size method. I less than test data dot size. All right. Now, all right. This is fine till now. Now we wanted to read the, say for example, list of objects. So this list has rows in it, right? And each row has cells in it, represented by this object array. All right. Now, in order to read this data dot get of index I, which will return me the, say for example, I equal to 1, right? Get of 1. It will actually is pointing to the row with index 1. That is second row in our case. So let's actually open this file and see. So if you see here, the first row, this is with 0th index, row with 0 index. This is row with index 1, right? So this is where we are now. I equal to 1, right? Get of I, meaning first row dot what we need to know, get of I of 0. I'll say get of I, in the sense it will actually give you the first row, right? In the first row in the sense it is actually list, right? What it has object array, right? Object array in the sense you can actually specify the index of it, right? So This is one array. Array is of, sorry, this is row, list, right? Get of I is actually giving the one element out of the list. So in this case, say for example, the first element. So what the first element consists of? It's an object array, right? So till here, it's an object. And I wanted to, within that object, I wanted to read a particular index. So how do you actually read the array index? So by specifying, again, array index also starts with 0. So I'm using 0 here, object of 0, which actually points to the username here, right? So because if you observe, so this is the row, right? We are pointing to. So this one will be the 0th index, cell 0, 1, 2, 3, like that, right? So when I say get out of 0, it actually gives me the username. And it is will be of cell type, right? So we'll convert it into string. And we'll take it into a string object. It's simple. So we call the Excel utils.getExcel data method, which actually gave us the test data object, which is a list. So list contains the record rows, right? Each row is a object array. So this object array is representing the cell values of that row, right? Now we are actually wanted to go through all the rows. So we have written a loop here. So if you observe, we started with one because we don't wanted to read the headers. So we just skipped this row. So we wanted to start with this row. Now what we did, we started with index 1 till the size and I plus plus, right? And then now if you observe username equal to, so test data dot get of I, which actually gives you the row. Within that row, so each row is an object array, right? Again, so that we are specifying it with the index. So this index actually gives this I represents the row, and this array, right, is representing the cell within that cell, in the sense column or cell, right, within that row. So when you say get I of 0, it will return you the username. Get I of 1, it will return the password, right? Get I of 2 will return the expected. Get I of 3 will return the result, right? Because it has 4 cell values and index starts with 0. Now, this is username. So in the same way, like when I say get I of 1, I'll get the password. Now, we read the data from the Excel file and we have it in the Java objects, right? So we have username and password. So what we can do now, we can just call the our method. So this data driven test object, we have it, right? Test dot test login is the method, and username and password are the parameters which will pass to it. That's it. So this already has the code for it. So when you pass username and password to it, what it has to do, it has to navigate to this particular URL, provide the username and password, whichever we passed as a parameters, click on the login button and validate this. And if it is passed, it has to return success. And if it is failed, it has to return failure. That we are already done, right? So we are just calling that method here. All right. So once we do this, so we wanted to capture this entire test login actually is returning what it is returning. It is returning a string. So we wanted to capture that into a string object. Now, once we get the string object, what we need to do? We have to call two methods. We wanted to pass this, we wanted to write this result back into the Excel file. So till now, we read this. This is fine. Now we wanted to write something into this result. We wanted to write back the result into the Excel file. So how do we do that? Again, so to write the data, we had some other methods defined here, right? So I'm going to use set cell data so that I can pass. When can I call this set cell data? I have to pass, when we are calling this set cell data method, I have to pass all these parameters. So let me pass that set cell. It's from Excel utils. Excel utils file dot set cell data. Excel file path, sheet is sheet name, right? And my row is I. And what is the column name? Column number index. It's a 3. And we are passing result to it, right? Yeah, it is saying unhandled exception of type IO. So the file could be present or not. So it's a checked exception. You can just say add throws declaration. See, it has become so simple. We just need to call set cell data and pass the parameters it is expecting. Ith row, third cell. Why it is third cell? 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. This is the place we wanted to write the data. So I have specified 3 here. Index of the cell. We have specified. And what data it has to return has been passed here. So the result. What is the result? How do you get it? Test login is gonna return you the result. That result, we're gonna pass it to the set cell data. What set cell data will do? It will actually set that cell value into that particular cell. In this case, this cell, right? So once it does that, what we wanted to do? We wanted to also fill it with color. We don't know what color. It could be failure. It could be success one. So what I'll do is I'll use fill color. Again, fill color is expecting file path, sheet name, which row, which column. Column is again represent column in the sense cell. Cell with the third index and what's the result. So based on the result, it will fill the color. That's it. So we are looping. What we are looping? We are passing some username and password to it. Fine. So sorry, we are getting the username and password from the list, which we got it from the getExcelData method. Now we have username and password. We just call the test login method, which actually executes this method. So which actually calls this test login method and will return us the result. So this result, we wanted to write it back to the Excel file. So we use the set cell data method. And we wanted to fill the color, corresponding color based on the result. So we are using fill color method from the Excel utils file. And once this is done, so what we wanted to do, we are in a loop, remember. So what we need to do, once we do this, we wanted to go back. So this is our test case, right? So once I am here, I wanted to go back. I'll click on the back button and provide the new input like this. And I'll click on this and I'll validate the second test data, right? So, and then provide the third data like this. And then we'll click on this back button. So how do you click on the back button in the browser? We can use, so if you remember, we have seen this driver.navigate.back, right? So where do we have the WebDriver? We have it in the data-driven test class. So driver.navigate.back. Because this WebDriver has been declared at the class level and it is a static one, static object. So I'm using data-driven test class name dot object name, right? Class name dot the instance variable dot navigate dot back, so that it goes back to the login form and the loop continues. So for the second row, again, username and password will be read from the list and then it is passed to the test login method. The result will be captured and will be passed to the set cell data to set the result back to the Excel file, and also we'll call the fill color method to fill the color according to the result. And again, we'll go back. We'll go to the next row and so on till all the rows are completed. So once we are done with this, we already have the tear down method, which actually quits the browser, right? So just for our confirmation, what we can do is, this is optional. I'll just write it as test completed. Make sure you close this file before you execute it, because it will be a conflict if it is open, right? So it can't, we are also writing the data into the Excel file, right? So it should not be in read mode or it should not be open. It can't write the data if the file is open elsewhere. So make sure you close the Excel file before you run the program, right? All right. Now let us run the program. So what it has to do, it has a main method. So execution starts with main. We created an object of data-driven test, test.setup. Test.setup has to run this. So the method will be called, and these 3 lines will be executed. Then Excel file path, sheet name, then we call a get Excel data, which actually returns us the list of objects, test data, and we have seen this. We have gone through this loop, which actually validates the username and password login forms with different test data. And once it is done, it will call the takedown method. So takedown method, so if you observe, it actually quits the browser. Now let us execute this. Yeah, it opens the browser, navigates to the particular URL. It is so fast. It is providing all the inputs like performance glitch user. It will take some time. Yeah, see, all the validated with all the test data, and finally it says test completed, right? Now, how do you validate it? So even if you are not there, right? So you can just run it. Say for example, there is like tens of test data. You wanted to validate it, right? So once you run this program, so how do you validate it? You can open the file. We are writing data back to this file, right? The result. So if you see here, the file has this result. Result it says success failure, all this, right? So you can just compare it with the left side cell. So what it says, if it matches with the expected value or not. So it exactly matches with the expected value here in our case, right? So this with this you can conclude. You can conclude that your test case has been working as expected. So this is all about data-driven testing. Any questions? Is it clear first of all? All right. So yeah, I think I don't need to repeat it again because it is already clear. So yeah, if you can go through this recording right once or twice, so you'll get it. It's all about like logic. How we are reading it and how we are parsing, what method we are calling, and why we are calling those methods. All these steps in order. So we have to know. So that gets with by watching the recording and practicing it. So with more practice, then it will you'll feel it as easy. So in some cases, like what happens is you'll be having config.properties as well. Say for example, let me put some file here. I'll show you. So in some cases, like we talked about config.properties, right? So I just wanted to show you that as well. So it will look something like this, right? So you can just provide the URL, your application URL, email, password, and what are all the some inputs you wanted to have it. So that inputs you can provide it before login, like which are all like frequently used inputs in your application that you can separate it from your code, and then we can actually call this as a put. We can save it as a some properties file. We usually call it as config.properties file, and then we can actually read that file, like read this file with this code. Like how do you read this file is let me put it here. I'll share this all these files, but let me go through this. So what we can do is, so say for example, if it is config properties file, right? So you'll use a properties class object, and then we'll use a method called load. which actually loads the file, this config.properties file. Assume this is your config.properties file, right? So once you load it, so this is how you can get back the properties. So this is a key value pair, right? So the left one is key, the right side one is value. So the properties file will have a key value pair. So get property of key will actually give you the value. Value in the sense right side value, right? So get property of app URL here will actually give you the this value. So that we are having it in the URL. Get property of email will give you the email value and so on, right? So the order all the frequently used ones that you can separate it in a config.properties file and you read that file like this using the properties class. So once we read this, so these are the string objects within the Java node. Now you can directly use these objects elsewhere in your code, wherever you want it. You don't need to again, read every time the file and like that, right? So you'll just, or you don't need to hard code this URL every time, the app URL. So you can just read it once from the file and you'll have it in the string objects within the Java objects. And these objects can be used in the automation script wherever required. So that's the use of having the config.properties file. So in this case, in our example, we didn't use that, but in the coming sessions, we'll use it. Just for your information, I'm putting it here. So any questions? If you don't have any questions, I'll give you some assignment here. So you can work on this assignment. It's a fixed deposit calculator. You can see it, right? So just inspect these elements and provide some value here. Say, for example, I provide some value, 20,000. Rate of interest, say, for example, I provide a 7.75. And period, you have to select, right? Say, for example, I provide 12 months and simple interest. You can take a simple interest also and just click on calculate button. So you get this maturity value, right? So you can read this value, you can put it in the expected value, right? All this test data, you can put it in an Excel file, like principal, rate of interest, period, frequency, all this. And then you click on it and in the expected value, you can have this value and match this with the, so you can calculate this value. So whatever value you get it here, right? So this you will match it with the expected value in the Excel sheet. So if it matches, you will actually write it as result as passed, or else you will mark your result as failed. So that will be the assignment. Simple. You just need to inspect this element. How we did it for login, username and password, we identified the element, right? So we called that method as test login. Maybe you'll call this method as calculate FD calculator or something like that, right? And then you actually identify these elements and pass the data. And to pass the data, you'll have the test data maintained in some Excel sheet with all this data. You can try it out. So if you are able to do it, then that's fine. Or else I'll upload the solution. So you can work on this assignment. I'll just put it here in the assignment part. So here you can actually try it out with different test data. So if you see here, so I just provided some random values, right? So you can maybe you'll check it with some other data, right? Only 6 months, or you'll change the drop down days. You'll change this frequency. So first you'll do it manually. You'll get some number that you'll put it in the Excel file in the expected value, and then uh, you'll actually validate it using the automation script. You can actually try out some combinations, at least some 4 or 5 combinations. Hope the assignment is clear. So yeah, I'll just stop here, and from the next session, we'll discuss about test engine.